So most of you guys have already met me. My name is Hakim, and that's actually my imposter name. I'm actually not. But some of you don't know my background. So I have been doing martial arts for the past almost 40 years. I got into it when I was 8 years old. And that led me on a quest later on in life where some really disturbing things happened in my life, and I decided that I wanted to dedicate my life to martial arts and music. So I said, well, I can do music anywhere, but where can I do martial arts at? And so through some weird circumstances, I came across this guy in Ohio who was the first American to go to Japan and study the ninja martial arts, right?
What's his name?
Stephen K. Hayes. And so Stephen lived in Ohio, and I went to the library and I picked up some books. This is when, research on the internet was pretty difficult. It was like 1997, right, or 98. And I fell in love with this art reading about it, and I decided I was going to go to Ohio and train with him. Loved it, and came home, kissed my mom on the cheek, said, hey, I'm moving to Ohio, I'm going to go train with this ninja guy. Right? And so that freaked everybody out because they're like, how do you make a living training as a ninja, right? And I didn't know, but I had to do it. Saved up $1,200. Didn't even know enough to get my power turned on at my first apartment. So I'm sitting in the dark and I have no credit, so I couldn't get like a security deposit because all my money was gone. So it was pretty intense, right? But I continued on there. And then later, through that, I decided that I wanted to use some of my skill sets that I got from that in the military. And so I joined the military, United States Army, and I went in a thing called psychological operations and learned a lot in that. I deployed overseas, and I got to use my talents in country, and got done with that. They sent me to executive protection school. I became a certified bodyguard and some other stuff. I went to language school. I learned how to speak Arabic, read, write, and speak Arabic. Airborne school, anti-terrorism school, and I've done a lot since then. Got out and started a martial arts school, and that's what I do. And I started on this quest of really trying to understand more of the esoteric path through ninjutsu. They have this nine kuji, which are these like abilities, these powers that the ninja was supposed to have embodied. And when you track that information, it comes all the way from India. So it goes through from India to like China and Tibet, and like it follows down over into Japan, and then the Japanese people. Then you had Shintoism, Shugindo, and things of that nature. These different practices that were coming out of the mountains of Japan. And these abilities, or these powers, these 9 powers that the ninja have, one of them is remote viewing, and another one is being able to see without your vision and sense danger. So when I had to go for my 5th degree black belt test, we have to do what they call a sword test, the sword dodging test, where our head teacher stands behind you, sends like this violent, murderous intent, and swings down, and then you have to like move out of the way, but you can't see. You're doing it from behind. So I failed that test 3 times, right? So, and it's a pretty much a gut check. I had done all these things and still had to take this test. And every time I would go to take this test, they would say, you're too athletic, too fast, you're thinking too much, too strategic, right? And I'd be like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, if your belt ranking's following the elements, because ninjutsu follows this elemental concept of earth, water, fire, wind, and void. And so at 5th degree, you're supposed to be like wind element, right? And that means that you're free, and you're serving, and you're letting go, and you're releasing all of these things, and you're just moving with the flow like a leaf blowing in the wind, right? And so I finally got to a point where I was like, well, I'm a 4th degree black belt. I've been doing this for however many years. I'm cool, I've trained in other arts. I got black belts in those arts. Maybe it's not meant for me to be a 5th degree in ninjutsu, right? And so I decided I was just gonna go and try one more time, regardless of what happens. Probably not gonna do it anymore, right? And so I remember they call my name. I come up, and it's what they call randori. So anyone can attack you from anywhere. There's a bunch of people running around trying to hit you with stuff, stab you, and things of that nature. And they say, "Are you ready?" I say, "Yes." They say, "Go." And that's all I remember, right? And the next thing I know, everybody stops and then they're all clapping, right? So I'm like, what? Did anybody attack me? And it was like, and they were like, "Man, that was so good." And then my teacher calls me up and he tells me to turn around, and I'm like still kind of in disbelief because I don't know what I just went through and what just happened. And then all of a sudden, I just feel I need to move, and the sword comes by me, right? And I was like, whoa. And I'm like, did I just pass the test? I'm in like disbelief. And then all of the seniors sat me down and they said, "Man, you finally got it." And see, in my mind, everything was about doing stuff. And at this point, it was about not doing stuff, right? Like letting go, releasing, being free, right? And being beyond the limitations of our own minds, wanting that logical brain trying to take control, right? And that connected me back to a story that my teacher told me about this time when he first got back from Japan, and everybody was all, there was this thing called the ninja boom in the United States. That's when, like, for those of you who remember, like Ninja Turtles and American Ninja, and that was all because of my teacher's quest. He came back and people were like fascinated with this idea of the ninja, and like all of Hollywood, like all the movies started popping up, right? And he told me that this guy from the Air Force had approached him in Ohio and was saying they were working on this thing where they wanted to know about seeing things in other places, which we now know is remote viewing. And he was like, "Oh, well, that's kind of like one of the Kuji. It's like Kuji 7. And they were like, "Yeah, tell us about that." So they had him do some stuff, and that guy's name was Del Graff. And if you don't know, if you know about the remote viewing world, you know who Del Graff is. He was very instrumental. He had as the Army was running their program, he had something going on at the Air Force that he was just dabbling in it. But then when the Army needed somebody to take over, he moved in and he took over the Army program. And he started doing this remote viewing with my teacher, and they had some success. And our teacher started telling us that story much later. And then when I had this experience with this 5th degree black belt test, I was like, I want to know what that is. And so then I thought about my teacher, and I was like, I need to go and look more into this remote viewing and stuff like that. And then that led me back to my childhood. And what I found really interesting is that cartoons, oddly enough, have been telling us a lot of this stuff from the get-go. And I see it with the kids at the school that I own now. Like there's all of these animations. And so the title of this talk, Sight Beyond Sight, actually comes from Thundercats. Anybody remember Thundercats, the cartoon? Yeah. This guy pulls out this sword, and he puts it up to his face, and it has a tiger's eye that goes right over his forehead. And he says, "Sword of omens, give me sight beyond sight." And then he's able to see in all these different places. Does anyone remember that? Right. So it's like, and I was like, huh. I was being told about this mind sight and remote viewing stuff when I was a kid in Thundercats. And kids are still doing it, but they don't know that it's real. So my quest is, how can we prepare the next generation as fully multidimensional human beings, where we understand the full capacities and embrace the full capacities of human technology, which we are the ultimate technology, right? So moving beyond that. So because there's going to be this we have a big world coming. We have bionic, what they call transhumanism. You know, people are going to be augmenting themselves with bionic pieces and putting chips in their head and doing all these things. And we can already see, like, for those of us, all of us actually, when we didn't have cell phones, how many numbers did you remember?
All of them.
All of them, right? It's like you would even go to new places and remember numbers in those new places, like immediately. But today, we'd be lucky to know our own number. Sometimes I ask people, "What's your number?" And they're like, let me look at my phone, you know? And they go and they check, and it's like, you know, and they've done studies on what having the phone do those things for you. It's a convenience, but it's also taking away from our own ability. So my quest is, how do we give some of these abilities and make them cool for the kids, so that they grow up with them, and then they pass that on to the next generation. So we're not disbelieving when the elders tell us that the reason we knew what plant to eat was because the plant actually told us, which now in books like The Secret Life of Plants, we're being told that plants are sentient beings, but the elders knew this long ago. Right? Like, wow, look at this discovery. Baxter hooks up these things and he says, I'm going to burn this plant, and the plant reacts, and then it communicates with other plants, and then we say, whoa, plants can talk. And the ancients have been telling us that all along, right? So, and as we saw in that last show, the ancients were telling us here about even mindset and things of that nature. So, when your senses don't make sense, right? So, Aristotle believed that there we go. You aren't the limit of your senses, and that's one of the things we got to think about. So Aristotle was one of the first person to say that we have these 5 fantastic senses, right? And they are vision, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. And for many years, this was believed to be the main ones, and that was kind of all we had. But really, we as human beings, especially when it comes to sight, we don't see very much of the color spectrum, right? So we see very little compared to like animals and things of that nature. Then when you move on to hearing, you know, we only hear between 20 and 2,000 or 20,000 hertz. Yeah, right? So, and then you got animals who hear ultrasound and infrasound, right? So they're like all over the spectrum. So again, we're not seeing very much. Then when we look at smell, it's the same thing, right? We can sense about 10,000 different smells, but animals like dogs and everything else can smell much, much more. So then, where are we actually on the spectrum of how much of our world that we're actually embodying, how much of it are we actually embracing? And that's why I have conversations with people who are in the science field all the time, and they want to tell me like what is possible based on this really, really confined space called science. And what I'm always trying to get them to say is science is not telling us all the time exactly what's possible. It's just giving us some terms and understanding about what's actually happening. Because if it was always what's possible, then we wouldn't have any innovation, right? Because I look at a bird, that's not possible, so why would I ever try? You know, somebody had to say that's not possible yet, but maybe it could be possible if I do these things. And then they had to go out there and test it out and create the plane. Now we're flying into space. Nobody saw that coming, right? Way back then. So science is giving us some very interesting dynamics, because we want to prove things, but that doesn't delegitimize the fact that some of those things may have already existed. It's just we may not have the ability to measure them. We may not have the ability to actually understand them at this particular time. And quantum physics is really bringing that to light right now with string theory and all these other things, right? So, self-imposed limits. All right, so the brain perceives about 10 million to 12 million bits of information at one time, right? And we're only able to get 40 to 50 of those bits in our brain to actually process it. It's coming in, right? All those millions, but we're only able to process about 40 to 50. So our brain has this cool thing called bounded rationality, where it allows us to only pick what's important, right? Because you already know, if you're having a conversation with somebody and then somebody texts you and you're trying to listen to them, but you're texting at the same time, there's some things that get missed, right? So we have, a lot of people say, oh, I'm multitasking, but really it's called task switching. You can't multitask. You're switching back and forth really fast in between tasks, and in that, some things get missed. Our brain decides that bounded rationality is our way of not being inundated by the information that's coming in at any given time. Right? And actually, if you go through regression and other types of therapy, they'll actually pull out information from your brain that you didn't even realize that you had in there, because it's all getting in. It's just a matter of, is your brain actually processing it or not? Right? So when I was in PSYOP, we had a thing when we did interviews, when we interviewed people that we thought had specific information. And that idea was, everything matters, right? Everything matters. Every scratch, every word, every tone, every movement, that all matters to the whole scenario. So pay attention, right? So pay attention, because you don't know where you might be getting that. And don't let your brain pull you into that space where it's only grabbing information it thinks is important, and it's leaving out other bits of information. So how can we train our mind to be expanded and to see more? So we're beyond the 5 senses now. There's some scientists that say we have up to almost 40 different senses, right? 40 different senses. So that's like blowing people's mind, because it's like, wait a minute, we got 40 senses, right? Why are people still talking about 5? Well, I can tell you, now that I'm in school for integrative health medicine with a focus on herbal medicine, one of the things that they talked about was the tongue. The tongue has this diagram. Anybody ever see the diagram of the tongue and its taste centers, and how it says sour is over here and salty's over here and bitter's right here? They proved a long time ago that that's not a real thing. Hey. That's not how but it stays it's still in a lot of books. So it's like, why is that still being taught, even though it's a consensus now that that's not the truth, right? So why are we still saying it's 5 senses when it's a consensus on most scientists who study this that we have way more than that, right? And then what is that doing to the expanded consciousness of the next generation? Because they come up and they only believe we have 5, so then they're not even exploring scientifically these other ones, right? And then we're missing out on an opportunity to advance the human race, right? So we got nociception. If I said that right, I hope I did. Which is sense of pain. We got proprioception, which is sensing the body and space. We got equilibrioception, which is the sense of balance. We got vomeronasal. Right? Somebody say that for me.
I think it's vomeronasal.
Yeah, he said it best. All right. We got thermoception. We got electroception. We got magnetoception, and then we have echolocation. So all of these are different things that we're already using, most of us are using, to be able to navigate through our societies and navigate through our world. Some of that information is coming in and we're just not even paying attention to it, because again, through that bounded rationality, it's saying that we don't need it. But what if we could actually tap into those different resources when we felt like we wanted to turn them on and make them more important than the others? It could really help us move into a new space and a new dynamic in our ability to navigate the world and see the world for what it really is, and not the world for the small piece that we think it is, right? So that's where we are in there. So now we talk about ESP. Let me catch up to my notes to make sure I don't miss any of the valuable information that I got there. So now we have ESP or EDP, so extrasensory perception, or what I call extra data perception, right? And I don't know if you'll find that out there. I think I kind of came up with that, but maybe not, because it's a big world and I'm a small person with limited time, right? So ESP, an awareness of events or facts that cannot be explained by communication using or can be explained, did I say that right? Cannot be explained by communication using any of the 5 senses, right? So this means that using the 5 senses, I feel like I can't explain what's happening here, what's going on. So then we say that it must be coming from outside of my senses. It must be coming from something outside of me. And that's going to be the extrasensory data, right? But if we have more than 5 senses, is it really coming from outside of ourselves? Or is it just extra data coming in through a different sense that we're not used to knowing about or using? Does that make sense? So, does that make sense? I like that. So, maybe there's something more. Maybe it's not actually extrasensory perception. Maybe it's just extra data that we're tuned into. And it's a perception of that extra data, right? And I'm not here to argue with the extrasensory perception, because I believe that it's a thing. But I also want to say that maybe some things that we think are extrasensory are extra data, and maybe there is another level that is extrasensory. Does that make sense? And if we can differentiate the two, then we know what we can deal with each system differently and enhance them based on the reality of how they actually exist and manifest in our world. Because if I don't really know what the question is, or if I don't have the right formula, then I'm not going to come up with the right solution. So if I put extrasensory perception in one formula, and then I'm looking at that, then that gives me a whole different perspective. And if I take the extra data and put that in another formula, and then I'm looking at that, that gives me a whole different perspective. That allows me to really explore those for what they truly are. Does that make sense? So that's kind of what we're thinking about, or what I'm thinking about in this particular thing when I say it. Is it really ESP? How do we filter this information? Can we be more capable than we think? A study published in the Cleveland Clinic site, or on the Cleveland Clinic site, that there are only 100 million neurons in the brain, but 500 million in the gut. Right? So we having all this gut science come out. So now we start thinking about these terms like gut instinct and gut feeling, right? So now it's like, whoa, you know, that's a pretty amazing thing. And what if we can unify these? Right? The gut and the brain. Now we have 600 million neurons working together for our benefit to make sure that we can move and perceive the world in its true form. Right? And so now, you know, when it comes down to gut instincts and gut feelings, you hear people all the time who ignore those things, who say, I knew what was going to happen. Right?
That's the first one.
Yeah. So the 100 million neurons are like out rationalizing the 500 million. The 500 million voices are out there screaming, hey, here's what's going on, here's what's going on. And 100 million is like, nah, bro, whatever, you know. It's kind of, yes.
Now they're beginning to call the combination of those the gut-brain axis.
The gut-brain axis or axis?
Axis.
Okay, AXIS. Got it. I'm going to write that down and use that later. And I'm going to put you in the references. So. All right, so think about that as you're going through. So again, that extra data perception, right? So if I'm thinking that this is all my perception, but then actually I have more, then it's not actually that this is outside the limits of my perception. It's just that I'm not actually taking it into account, right? It's there, it's happening, I'm feeling it, it's working for me, but I'm ignoring it. I'm saying, oh, no, not an A. It can't be an A. That's the first letter in the alphabet, right?
That's too simple.
It's too simple. It can't be that, you know? And I'm not trying to pick on you because I've done it too. I mean, we're all doing it, you know, all the time. We're trying to...
No offense taken.
Okay.
I know it.
I have a sense this is not new. And that was right on at this last show because we were talking about that. Ever heard the saying that there's nothing new under the sun, right? So Patanjali, so I am a yogi and practicing. I've been doing yoga for the last 4 years. I've been involved in a almost going on 1,900-hour course for yoga training, yoga therapist training, directly under the lineage of a guy named Krishnamacharya. And my teacher was Desikachar, which is his son. And so one of the things that we go into is when we go into the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and we look at chapter 3, verse 16, or Sutra 16, the ability to reach any place in the universe at will is actually the siddhi, which is the power, right, that you unlock by doing deep yogic practice, right? The full breath of yoga. This means the 8 limbs of yoga, not asana practice, which is what we tend to see and call yoga, right? And so that is something that he talked about 2,000 years ago, right? And we're just thinking about that now. So what happens with this idea of these ancients talking about seeing things at different times at different places, and then us still not believing that they're true? And in that last show we were just watching, You know, that's based on that dude. Like, yeah, it's based on a real story of this guy that these scientists were trying to, interview and study long time ago, and now here we are again studying it. It's in our cartoons, right? Sort of omens give me sight beyond sight, right? And it's like how much stuff. It's like almost like. Even with the cartoon aspect, like the human psyche or some level of us instinctually is trying to pass on this information to other generations, so that it just keeps the spark alive. Like it's trying to almost protect itself. Like we need to have it. We need to have it, right? And I've not had a chance to ask you what drives you, but I mean, we got two wonderful teachers here who at one point just decided we need to be teaching this stuff. We need to be passing this stuff on. I have this burning desire. You have this burning desire. Anybody in the crowd that I haven't talked to yet that probably wants to teach it has this burning desire, and it just kind of pops up. And you're just like, yes, I need to help teach this and bring this into the world. What is that? What are we all connected to, right? What's the heads and tails of it? So I like to think about this. So I say, we think about, or my teacher, Paul H. Smith, so I'm in remote viewing. I've been doing remote viewing for some time. I've trained with many of the original people in the Army program. So very close friends with Tom McNair and Skip Atwater and Paul H. Smith. I'm about to finish Joe McMonacle's level 2 at the Monroe Institute. And so I've been working with a lot of people, Angela Thompson Smith as well. So Paul talks about how they came across this issue in remote viewing, where sometimes remote viewing wasn't enough and they needed to locate things like, let's say if they were on a DEA mission, the Drug Enforcement Administration, they knew they had drugs coming in. They knew it was going to be on this ship, but they weren't sure where it was going to be on the ship. So instead of using remote viewing, sometimes they used a combination of remote viewing and dowsing. And who knows what dowsing is? All right. So dowsing is when you use, like you can use rods or something like that. And actually, I saw it firsthand before I really even understood it. I own 100 acres of land. I got it cleared. I got an area cleared. I'm building a campus out there, and I had to get a well. The guy was a third-generation well person. He comes out of his truck. I'm paying, mind you, wells aren't cheap. Just to get these dudes to show up, it's a lot of money. So he comes out. I'm thinking he's gonna have hey, can you help me with all this equipment so I can run radar, your land and figure out where the water is? This dude gets out, he's got his hat turned sideways, he's got the old country look to him, he's got these two rods, he starts walking around, he finds it, stakes it, drills it, the water is 100 feet down. When he staked it and he started to set the drill up, I was thinking in my brain, I am not paying this dude to not get water, and just be out here all day with this little rod.
2 sticks.
Yeah, and he nailed it. I asked him, I said, how do you know to do that? We've been doing this for the last 3 generations of my family. We are all well drillers, and this is how we find the water. And he said, 9 times out of 10, I always get it on the first try. I'm like, if that's not data, I don't know what is. These guys make a living, and that's how they do it. Bam, bam, bam. So dowsing is this using these different devices as a means to help you locate something that you know that you're looking for. Remote viewing is kind of the other side of the coin. It's like you kind of know what the general area of what's going on, but you don't know what's there or how to go it. So you have an idea, a direction, right? With dowsing, you don't have a direction. You know what you're looking for. I'm looking for gold. I'm looking for water. I'm looking for oil. You just don't know where. Where remote viewing, you kind of know where, but you just don't know what, right? What is it? What's in there? What's going on in there, right? So they're two sides of the same coin. So now this is what we were talking about. I'm not sure if it was earlier today or yesterday, right? Where we talk about the difference, non-local awareness versus local awareness. Remote viewing is non-local awareness. I'm bilocated. It means that my consciousness is both here and there at the same time. So it is not astral projection, right? Which is different. Like my consciousness actually like goes over there and I'm hanging out. And normally you're not aware of what's going on with your body because your full consciousness is hanging out on Wall Street, right? It's like, what's the numbers going to be this week? Bilocation is different because my consciousness is here. I'm aware of what's going on in the room. I'm talking to a monitor, but I'm also there. And I'm telling the monitor what I see over there. This is what's happening at such and such place. This is what they're doing. I feel this. I feel this. I feel like this color is here. I feel like this is going on over here. You're given all these descriptors. Dowsing is local awareness. That means that my consciousness is here, but it's fully here. It's outside of me. It is what we're doing in this mind sight. It is me being able to be locally aware of things outside of my body, right? So I'm able to see like this bag over here, or the dice, or the number on the dice, even though I can't physically see it, right? I'm able to see, gold in the ground, or water in the ground, or whatever, oil, or whatever I'm looking for. So I'm more local. Ingo Swann was one of the psychics that helped build the remote viewing program in the military. He was like this incredible psychic, and his superpower, listening to all of my teachers, is that he was not only able to be a psychic, he was able to describe and define and test the hypothesis, use the scientific method, and a means in which he was able to build a curriculum, and that's super difficult. If you've ever had to write a curriculum for anything, that's really hard, right? So it's like one thing to be able to do it. Then I have to be able to write it down, articulate it, and express it in a way that other people can grasp it from the different variety of backgrounds that they come from, which we're all seeing here. To some people it's a little dives, to some people it's a little, wavy for this, that, and the other. They had to live all of that, they had to hold that, they have to record it and be able to kind of translate that to you guys, and all of us actually, so that we can grow in it, right? So we have the two. We flip a coin, one side is heads, one side is tails. In this case, one side is remote viewing, the other side is dowsing. Ingo Swann said that you should be able to remote view in a foxhole. That's the way he really went, right? And it wasn't like, you're really going to fight a war and be in a foxhole, but I think he really was saying, like, regardless of the distractions, regardless of what's going on around you, the ultimate goal is to be so in tune with this non-local and local awareness that just like I can use near sight and far sight, right? We don't think about that. We just pick it up and no, I can read it. Oh, I look over there. Oh, I can read that, right? So my brain is just switching back and forth on its own, how my pupils are dilating and going back and forth. That's what he was saying. Like, it didn't matter where you are or what you're doing, you should be able to switch back and forth in between this. And that would be the ultimate goal of somebody trying to reach the pinnacle of this training, right? So this is my kind of explanation. I kept going through all these different and brainstorming with friends, like what exactly is this like? Why can we do this? Why can I see what's in another time and space in the forward future, in the present, or in the past? Why, and it could be here locally, I can find something that's missing behind that door, or it can be far away. I can find somebody can call me and say, hey, I can't find my keys. And I'm like, look underneath the left shoe in the back corner. And they're like, what? How did you know? And you connect with that thing, whatever it is. And the way I started to really, and we've heard the conversation about we're all one and we're all connected and things of that nature. And when I started to try to explain that to people who weren't in this kind of world, right? They'd just be like, and I'm like, yeah, string theory, quantum, and we're all space, and blah, blah, blah. And we're actually not touching things because it's my magnetic pole going against yours. And, like people would just be like, whatever, dude. And then I said, well, I said, what if consciousness is the water in this cup and we are ice cubes? Right? We're all made of the same thing, and when our physical life is done, we melt and transition back into consciousness. It's not two separate things. The ice and the water are made of the same thing. It's just two different states, right? And that was kind of like the best way. Every time I tell people that who aren't in this world, they're like, I get it, you know? And I was like, that's my best explanation. Because what we have found is we found that everything is made of atoms and molecules, and those break down to protons and electrons, and then the quarks, and then from there you have string theory, right? And so these things are connected, and there's all this space in between there. So what is that space? That space is the water, the consciousness. It's all pervading. It's in there. It's out there. The yogis talked about this too, right? And then there's these ice cubes that kind of take form as our physical bodies in this reality. But we still, if you look, we're still not actually fully hard physical beings. We're actually all this space as well, right? And then that space pervades our body as it does everything in existence, right? One of my favorite quotes I heard: the atoms of our body are traceable to the crucible in the center of stars. We're not simply in this universe. The universe is alive within us. You are made of the same ingredients as stars. We are literally stardust that achieved consciousness so we could ponder the extent of the universe in which we live. All right? P.S. Hakim's a nerd. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so the perception beyond. Patanjali talked about this. This is one of his quotes. All right, the great secret is this: it is not enough to have intuitions. We must act on them. We must live in them. Right? This space, this feeling, whatever that is, that intuition represents our connection to everything. Does that make sense? We must live in that space, is what he's saying. Your connection, your understanding that the ant is you, that you are me, and I am you, and we're a reflection of one another. That's what I believe he was talking about. I live in that. That means that when I hurt you, I hurt me. So I rather love you because I really love a lot more, right? So I'm living in the space of this intuition. That intuition is the feeling that I'm connected to all things around me, right? And so that's what I believe he meant. Again, I could be wrong. According to the Webster's Dictionary, the definition of intuition is the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning. So we are beyond beyond what we call the conscious reasoning. We are a superconsciousness that understands and identifies and can recognize itself in everything, right? Skip Atwater. Does anyone know who Skip Atwater is? Okay. So Skip Atwater was the gentleman who the Army said, hey, we talked to these two scientists, Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. We know that this kind of idea of this remote perception exists. The Russians are doing it. They're spending a lot of money on it. We need a program. So those two guys came out and they said, okay, well, how are we going to do this? They proved that it worked. And then they went to the military. They said, we know it works. The military said, well, we don't know what to do with this because we don't know what to do with this, right? So they put Skip Atwater on the job and said, hey, you're a nice little Army officer. We're going to have you go out there and figure this out and come up with a program for us. So he started that. He started working on that program, started looking for people in the military to bring on board, him and Tom McNair as well as Mel Riley. And then they started to build and develop. After some years, he got out, and then he went to the Monroe Institute, because he forged a relationship with Robert Monroe. through the sound science that they were using the hemisync to help people's mind expand, and then he became the primary coordinator of all hemisync, and then at one point he actually became the president and CEO of the Monroe Institute, and then he retired. So, so he's got a really, really awesome life, and the thing he says is anywhere and anyone. Is that's every time, and he's a really interesting guy to talk to. Have you ever heard the stories of the yogi or the wise man on the mountain, and the young person tries to talk to them but can't because they're just so far advanced, like everything they say doesn't make sense to the young person? So I was at Tom McNair's house, and I'm sitting across from Skip, and I'm trying to ask him all of these questions. And not only were there these long, uncomfortable pauses between every answer. Be like, Skip, so what exactly did you feel when you were out there learning this stuff? And he stares, smiles. And he might say anywhere, anywhen. He might point up there, or he just might answer me in some really super riddle way, and I'm like, I hope 30 years from now I figure out what that means. So, but thank you. I'm glad to be in your presence. You're the man. So, so that's Skip for you, all right? And so, who are we really? And I actually want to make sure that I definitely hit this one, because this was really important for me. So we all have so much potential to know what we want if we just allow ourselves to embrace knowing. Unfortunately, this can be difficult for many since we live in a social construct that chooses logic and reasoning over intuition. So as Russell Targ would say, who you really are is non-local awareness, independent of space and time, right? And that's that water. In between everything, it exists between all of those ice cubes all at once. It's also in those ice cubes all at once. It's non-local awareness. It's your aware, you actually are everything. You're expanded way bigger than we are, right? And that's the thing that I want you guys to remember as we move through. And then another one of my favorite quotes. I'm a quote guy. This is Patanjali too. If you've ever heard of him and read any of his stuff, it's pretty profound. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person than you ever dreamed yourself to be. And so, for me, he's saying that we, again, are everything. I'm trying to really hit that home with you guys. And everything is in us. And once we realize who we truly are, then we can really be one with the universe. And so as we proceed with the training here at this wonderful event put on by these two wonderful people, I ask you to remember who you are, and what you will always be. And then I would like to close with you understanding that in my perception, you are limited potential pulsing in a web of everything. That's all I have.
Okay, and the Q&A.
Yes, let's do questions and
This
answers.
is a fabulously interesting presentation that you did. We appreciate it very much.
Thank
Of course, that will stimulate yet more questions. So, who has the first question? Joseph. You're usually the guy.
I do have a curiosity
Yes.
and a bit of a theory.
Yes.
Taste and smell being the same sense,
Mm.
because you can't taste if you hold your nose.
Yes. Actually, on here, and I didn't say it today, is that I normally call it four senses because taste and smell are so closely related.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And if I'm eating something, yeah, the breathing through the nose actually makes the taste stronger. So like it's the same thing. It's just an external taste and an internal taste, or an internal smell.
Yeah, yeah.
Something. I don't know. That's my random question. Anyone got any more interesting question?
And actually, when you're inhaling and you're feeling, your olfactory senses are actually taking in particles, which was the most disgusting thing because I have dogs, right? So anytime you poop, and when I found this out, I was like, so you're saying I'm inhaling poop particles in my nose, and then I taste it in my mouth? This is ridiculous, you know? But yes, the answer. And then for those of you who don't know, which may be of interest because it's part of my journey, especially for my yogic travels, I was on several television shows, and I've been, one of them being Naked and Afraid. So I was in the Himalayan mountains, naked.
Wow.
And at night it was 30 degrees, and in the day it was 60 degrees. And I somehow ended up right outside of this temple devoted to Shiva. And didn't know any of that at the time, but had this really profound awakening on the mountain that kind of taught me a lot of this stuff, and then also pushed me on this path as well. So, and then since then I've been to the Tibetan Plateau, which I did a show in China, and that also was very profound. It was like I was just continuing to learn the lessons. And it was really weird. We talk about these synchronicities where like each show sent me to a place that had something to do with this journey, right? And it was all like on their budget. Like I never told them like, hey, I'm into this stuff. I want to be on the mountains of the Himalayan mountains, like right there on the edge, you know, or over here where, you know, the Dalai Lama has a really big following, you know, his group in the Tibetan Plateau. That's where I want to go, you know, and meet these monks and like get to hang out with them and all this stuff. It was like, I didn't know any of that.
That show sounds like the show Mind, Body, and Kicking Ass.
I've not seen that.
There's a guy who visits all these places, checks out Qigong. He goes visits the Dalai Lama. He talks to this one monk in a temple, and the guy is counting beads, and he levitates.
Oh, I do know that.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I do know that show.
It was originally called Mind, Body, and Kicking Ass, but they kind of changed it Mind, Body, and Kicking Moves because people couldn't take the ass part.
Yeah, I think you can find it on YouTube.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Excellent.
Any other questions?
How old are you again?
47.
Yeah, you don't look it. There's another one.
Well, thank you. My ice cube is melting soon. My body may not always feel
All
it.
our cubes are melting.
You are 47, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, same age.
Yeah.
Oh, we're the same age. Oh man. Yeah, because I wouldn't have guessed that neither.
So much, Hakim.
Thank you. I appreciate that.